Scenarist Yulia Yakovenko. Kilki Symboliv 45,887. Nazva. I arrived at my wife's law firm event and introduced myself. The staff looked confused. Preview. I arrived at my wife's law firm event and introduced myself. The staff looked confused. You're not on the list. I searched for my wife and asked her. She rolled her eyes. Did you really think you'd be invited? I smiled calmly. I understand. I left. During the ceremony, her phone rang nonstop. Story. The mahogany doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom swung open like the gates of hell, except hell probably had better lighting and definitely more honest people. I adjusted my tie, the expensive one Andrea had bought me for our anniversary 3 years ago, back when she still pretended to care about such things, and stepped into Boston's legal elite gathering like a lamb walking into a den of wolves. Only these wolves wore Armani and quoted billable hours instead of howling at the moon. Name, please? The blonde hostess with the clipboard looked at me like I'd crawled out from under a rock. Her smile was plastic enough to survive a nuclear winter. Tom Heller. My wife is Andrea Heller, partner at Morrison, Blake & Associates. She scanned her list twice, her manicured finger tracing down the names with the precision of a surgeon. Then she looked up with that special kind of confusion reserved for people who've just discovered their GPS has led them into a swamp. I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on our list. The words hit me like a slap, but I'd been investigating insurance fraud for 15 years. I knew how to keep my face neutral when people lied to my face. And brother, this felt like the biggest lie of all. Must be an oversight, I said, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. I'll just find my wife and sort it out. The hostess's expression suggested I'd just announced my intention to perform naked interpretive dance on the dessert table. Sir, I really can't let you. It's fine, I said, stepping around her with the confidence of a man who belonged there, even though my gut was telling me I belonged there about as much as a fish belongs in a tree. I'll just haunt the bar until someone notices me. The ballroom was a monument to legal success, all crystal chandeliers and gold trim that screamed we bill by the minute and love every second of it. Lawyers in $1,000 suits clustered around cocktail tables, discussing cases that probably cost more than my annual salary. The women wore jewelry that could fund a small country's defense budget, and the men had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having to check their bank balance before buying something. I spotted Andrea across the room, and for a moment, my heart did that stupid flutter thing it had been doing for 20 years. She looked stunning in a black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, her dark hair swept up in some complicated style that probably required an engineering degree to achieve. She was laughing at something one of her colleagues was saying, her head thrown back in that carefree way that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. Now it just made me feel like an idiot. I made my way through the crowd, catching fragments of conversation that sounded like a foreign language. The Henderson acquisition, and SEC compliance issues, and billable hours projections. This was Andrea's world, and I was starting to understand that I'd never really been part of it. Tom! Andrea's voice carried that special tone she used when I'd done something embarrassing in public. What are you doing here? The conversation around us died like someone had flipped a switch. Her colleagues looked at me with the kind of polite interest usually reserved for roadkill. Thought I'd surprise you, I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She turned slightly, so my lips barely grazed her skin. Hope that's okay. Of course, she said, but her smile was tighter than a violin string. Everyone, this is my husband, Tom. Tom, this is Patricia Westbrook from the DA's office, and James Morrison, our senior partner. Handshakes were exchanged with the enthusiasm of people greeting a tax audit. Patricia's grip was limp, and Morrison looked at me like he was trying to figure out what species I belonged to. What line of work are you in, Tom? Morrison asked, his voice carrying the kind of polite disinterest that suggested he'd rather discuss his dental work. Insurance fraud investigation, I said. I chase down people who think they can outsmart the system. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. How interesting. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as awkward. Andrea's laugh sounded forced, like she was trying to push a boulder uphill with her vocal cords. Tom has such fascinating stories, she said. Don't you, honey? Before I could answer, her phone started ringing. Not just ringing, blaring Cotton-Eyed Joe at a volume that could wake the dead. It was the ringtone I'd programmed as a joke years ago, back when we still laughed together. Now it sounded like a funeral dirge played by a drunk marching band. Andrea's face went through several shades of red as she fumbled for her phone. The entire ballroom seemed to turn and stare as the twangy melody echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She finally managed to silence it, but not before I caught the name on the screen. Mark, excuse me, she said, her voice tight enough to cut glass. I need to take this. She hurried toward the hallway, leaving me standing with Morrison and Patricia like a third wheel on a bicycle built for two. They made polite excuses and drifted away faster than smoke in a hurricane, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense that something was very, very wrong. I decided to follow my instincts, the same ones that had helped me catch dozens of insurance cheats over the years. Instead of leaving, I found a quiet corner near the hallway where Andrea had disappeared and did what I do best. I listened. Can't talk now, Mark. I'm at the firm event. Andrea's voice was hushed but urgent. I know, but I miss you. When can I see you again? My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The voice was male, smooth, and definitely not discussing legal matters. Soon, Andrea said. Tom's being difficult lately, always asking questions, wanting to know where I am. Maybe it's time to tell him. Not yet. I need to figure out the best way to handle this. The divorce, I mean. The word divorce hit me like a freight train loaded with broken dreams. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I started recording. 20 years of marriage, and she was discussing our divorce with another man like it was a business transaction. I love you, the voice said. I love you too, Mark, more than I ever loved him. I stopped recording and leaned against the wall, feeling like someone had just performed open-heart surgery on me with a rusty spoon. 20 years, 2 kids, a mortgage, a life built together, brick by brick, and she was ready to demolish it all for some guy named Mark. My phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Lou. How's the fancy lawyer party? Remember us little people when you're rich and famous? I typed back. Just discovered my wife is cheating on me. Other than that, it's great. The response came immediately. Holy shit, you okay? Define okay. Want me to come get you? I looked around the ballroom, at all the successful people living their successful lives, and realized I didn't belong here. Maybe I never had. No, I typed. I'm going to stick around and see what else I can learn. Know thy enemy and all that. I spent the next hour playing Invisible Man, circulating through the crowd with my phone recording conversations. It's amazing what people will say when they think nobody's listening. I learned that Andrea had been seen at expensive restaurants with a mystery man, that she'd been working late more often, that some of her colleagues suspected she was having an affair but were too polite or too smart to say anything directly. I also learned that Mark was Mark Devlin, a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. Apparently, he'd been very helpful in finding Andrea some investment opportunities. The way her friend Jessica said it, with air quotes and a knowing smirk, made it clear what kind of investments they were talking about. As the evening wound down, I positioned myself near the coat check and waited. Sure enough, Andrea appeared, looking flushed and excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. Behind her, trying to look casual, was a man I recognized from the real estate signs scattered around Boston's most expensive neighborhoods. Mark Devlin was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was, average height. Perfectly styled hair where mine was thinning. Expensive suit that fit like it had been sewn directly onto his body. He had the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money, and the kind of smile that probably made women forget their own names. They were trying to leave separately, but I caught the look that passed between them. It was the look Andrea used to give me, back when we were young and stupid, and thought love could conquer anything. Now she was giving it to another man, and I felt something die inside my chest. I followed them outside, staying in the shadows like some discount private detective. They met at the corner, and I watched through the window of a coffee shop as they kissed with the passion of teenagers. Her hands were in his hair, his were on her waist, and they looked like they were trying to devour each other. When they broke apart, Mark said something that made Andrea laugh, that real laugh, not the fake one she'd been using around me for months. Then he walked her to her car, opened the door like a gentleman, and kissed her once more before she drove away. I stood there in the cold Boston night, watching the taillights of my wife's car disappear into traffic, and made a decision that would change everything. If Andrea wanted to play games, I was going to show her what happened when you played games with someone who investigated liars for a living. The house felt different when I got home. Not physically. The same furniture sat in the same places. The same family photos smiled down from the same shelves. But emotionally, it was like walking into a crime scene. Every shared memory now felt contaminated. Every loving gesture suddenly suspect. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my home office, staring at the recording on my phone. Andrea's voice, saying she loved another man, played on repeat in my head like a broken record. The smart thing would have been to confront her immediately, to have it out like adults. But 20 years of marriage had taught me that Andrea was a lawyer first and a wife second, and lawyers never entered a fight without preparation. Neither would I. I opened my laptop and did what I do best. I started investigating. Mark Devlin's real estate website painted him as Boston's premier luxury property specialist. His bio claimed he'd sold over $50 million in properties last year alone. The photos showed him shaking hands with satisfied clients, standing in front of mansion after mansion, living the American dream in high definition. But I'd been chasing fraud long enough to know that websites lie as easily as people do. The real story was always in the details, and I was very good at finding details. I started with public records. Mark owned a condo in Back Bay, expensive, but not as expensive as his website suggested he could afford. His mortgage was substantial, and according to the property tax records, he'd been late on payments twice in the past year. His car, a BMW 7 Series, was leased, not owned. The man was living beyond his means, propped up by credit and image. Next, I checked social media. Mark's Instagram was a carefully curated showcase of success, expensive dinners, luxury cars, beautiful women. But none of the women appeared in more than 1 or 2 photos, and several of the luxury locations were actually mid-tier restaurants with good lighting. The man was selling an image, and like most salesmen, he was his own best customer. I cross-referenced his client testimonials with property records and found something interesting. 3 of his biggest claimed sales from last year had actually closed with different agents. Mark was padding his resume, claiming credit for deals he'd never touched. By 3 in the morning, I had a comprehensive picture of Mark Devlin, a moderately successful real estate agent living like a millionaire, cutting corners where he thought no one would notice, and apparently using his charm to seduce married women. The kind of man who looked good from a distance but fell apart under scrutiny. Tumor. Perfect. Andrea came home at 3:30, claiming she'd been out with the girls, celebrating a successful case. She smelled like expensive cologne, not mine, and her lipstick had been reapplied. She kissed my forehead with the same enthusiasm she might show a distant relative and went straight to bed. I sat in the dark, sipping bourbon and planning my next move. The following morning, Andrea left early for depositions. I waited an hour, then called her office. Morrison, Blake & Associates. How may I help you? Hi, this is Tom Heller, Andrea's husband. I wanted to surprise her with lunch, but I can't remember where she said her depositions were today. Could you help me out? Oh, Mr. Heller, how sweet. But Mrs. Heller doesn't have any depositions today. She's in the office, working on the Henderson brief. Would you like me to transfer you? No, thanks. I'll just surprise her there instead. I hung up and felt that familiar burn in my chest. Not heartbreak this time, but anger. Pure, clean anger that felt better than the pain. She was lying to my face with the casual ease of someone who'd had plenty of practice. I drove to Andrea's office building and parked across the street with a clear view of the exit. At 11:47, she emerged wearing sunglasses and a smile, walking with the kind of spring in her step that I hadn't seen in months. She climbed into her car and drove off, and I followed at a distance. She led me to the Four Seasons, where Mark was waiting in the lobby. They embraced like long-lost lovers, and I watched through the window as they headed for the elevator. My wife of 20 years was having a midday rendezvous with another man, and she'd lied to both her office and me to make it happen. I sat in my car for 2 hours, taking photos with my phone's camera and making notes. When they finally emerged, Andrea's hair was mussed and her cheeks were flushed. They kissed goodbye in the lobby, like they were starring in their own romantic movie, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was documenting every moment. That evening, Andrea came home with takeout from our favorite restaurant and a story about how stressful her day had been. She complained about difficult clients and impossible deadlines, while I nodded sympathetically, all the while thinking about the photos on my phone. You seem distracted, she said, studying my face with the analytical look she used on witnesses. Just work stuff, I lied, surprised at how easily the deception came. Big case, insurance fraud. Guy thinks he can outsmart the system. What kind of fraud? The stupid kind. Guy's living way beyond his means, claiming success he hasn't earned, thinking nobody will notice the discrepancies. Andrea's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Sounds like you've got him dead to rights. Oh, I do. It's just a matter of timing. You want to gather all the evidence before you make your move. Otherwise, they might find a way to wiggle out of it. She nodded, but I caught something in her expression. A flicker of unease that was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. What happens to people like that when they get caught? Depends on how deep the fraud goes. Best case scenario, they lose everything and have to start over. Worst case, I shrugged. Let's just say that living a lie catches up with you eventually. After dinner, Andrea excused herself to review some contracts in her home office. I heard her talking quietly on the phone, but couldn't make out the words. An hour later, she emerged looking troubled. Everything okay? I asked. Fine, she said quickly. Just client issues. But she spent the rest of the evening checking her phone obsessively. And when she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through her phone. I know it was a violation of privacy, but she'd already violated something more important than privacy. She'd violated 20 years of trust, and turnabout seemed like fair play. Her text messages with Mark painted a picture that made my stomach turn. They'd been seeing each other for 4 months. They talked about leaving their respective spouses. Mark was apparently married too, something his Instagram had conveniently omitted. They made plans for weekends away and discussed which hotels had the best discretion policies. But the worst part was a group chat called Operation Upgrade that included Andrea, Mark, and her best friend Jessica. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be overcome. Jessica referred to me as deadweight and suggested that Andrea could do so much better. Mark called me the insurance guy, like it was some kind of disease. They were planning my humiliation with the same careful attention to detail that Andrea brought to her legal cases. She'd already consulted with a divorce attorney, not someone from her firm, but a specialist who handled high-net-worth separations. She was planning to take half of everything, including the house my father had left me. I screenshot everything and emailed the images to myself, then carefully put her phone back exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat in the dark, drinking bourbon and planning my revenge. If Andrea wanted to upgrade, I was going to show her what happened when you tried to trade in someone who knew how to fight back. The game was on. Lou Brennan had been my partner for 3 years when we were both starting out in insurance investigation, before he'd gotten fed up with corporate bureaucracy and opened his own bar in Southie. O'Malley's was the kind of place where cops and firefighters went to forget about their day, where the beer was cold, the whiskey was older than most of the customers, and nobody asked too many questions about why you looked like hell. I found Lou behind the bar at 2 in the afternoon, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of a man who'd found peace in routine. He looked up when I walked in, took one look at my face, and reached for the good whiskey. You look like someone ran over your dog, he said, pouring 2 fingers of Jameson into a glass. What's eating you? My wife is cheating on me. Lou's hand paused for exactly 1 second, then continued pouring. You sure? I've got photos, recordings, and text messages. She's been screwing some real estate hotshot for 4 months, and they're planning to take me for everything I'm worth in the divorce. Shit. Lou slid the glass across the bar. I'm sorry, Tom. 20 years, right? 20 years. I took a sip and felt the whiskey burn away some of the anger. She thinks I'm some pathetic loser she can discard when she's ready to upgrade. Her words, not mine. Lou studied my face with the analytical look he'd perfected during his years as a cop. What do you want to do about it? I want to destroy them both. Legally speaking, I hope. Completely legally. I'm not going to jail for these people, but I want them to lose everything that matters to them, their reputations, their careers, their social standing. I want them to understand what it feels like to be discarded like garbage. Lou nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Information. The guy's name is Mark Devlin. He's married, but he's been very careful to keep that quiet. I need to know everything about him. His wife, his business, his weaknesses. Can you help? Can I help? Lou grinned, and for a moment he looked like the cop he used to be. Tommy, my boy, you're talking to someone who spent 15 years digging up dirt on people who thought they were smarter than the system. Mark Devlin won't know what hit him. Lou made some calls while I nursed my whiskey and tried to process the fact that my marriage was over. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart on television. 3 days ago, I'd been a happily married man, with 2 kids and a mortgage. Now I was planning the destruction of my wife and her lover, with the help of an ex-cop who specialized in making problems disappear. Interesting guy, you're Mark Devlin, Lou said, hanging up his phone. Real name is Marcus Devolansky. Changed it legally about 10 years ago. Probably thought it sounded more upscale. He's married to a woman named Susan, who comes from old Boston money. Her family owns half of Beacon Hill. She's the one funding his lifestyle, not his real estate commissions. What else? He's got a reputation in certain circles. Likes to target married women, especially ones with money or connections. Your Andrea isn't his first lawyer, and she probably won't be his last. Guy's a serial cheater who's turned it into an art form. The information hit me like a physical blow. Andrea wasn't special to him. She was just another conquest, another married woman to seduce and discard. The thought that she'd thrown away our marriage for someone who saw her as just another notch on his bedpost made me want to put my fist through the wall. There's more, Lou continued. Susan Devlin, that's his wife. She's been asking questions lately, hiring private investigators, having him followed. Word is she's getting ready to divorce him, and when she does, he's going to lose everything. The condo, the car, the lifestyle, it's all hers. How long do I have? Month, maybe 2. Susan's being very careful, very thorough. She wants to make sure she has everything documented before she makes her move. A plan started forming in my mind, pieces falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle. I need to meet Susan Devlin. That can be arranged. She's been looking for allies, people who can provide information about her husband's activities. I think she'd be very interested in what you have to offer. We met the next evening at a coffee shop in Back Bay, neutral territory that wouldn't raise suspicions. Susan Devlin was nothing like what I'd expected. She was in her early 40s, elegantly dressed but not flashy, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from old money and older breeding. She looked like someone who'd never had to raise her voice to get what she wanted. Heller, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Lou tells me we have a common problem. Your husband is sleeping with my wife, so I've been told. I'm sorry, I know how much it hurts. There was genuine sympathy in her voice, and I realized that despite her wealth and connections, she was going through the same hell I was. Her husband was betraying her just as thoroughly as my wife was betraying me. How long have you known? I asked. About the cheating in general? Years. About your wife specifically? About 3 weeks. My investigator has been very thorough. She opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder. I think you should see these. The photos inside made my stomach turn. Mark and Andrea in restaurants, hotels, even in his car in what they thought was a secluded parking garage. They were all over each other like teenagers, completely oblivious to the fact that they were being watched and documented. There are more, Susan said quietly. Much more. My husband has been very careless, and your wife, well, she's not as smart as she thinks she is. Well, I looked up from the photos. What do you want from me? Information, cooperation. My husband thinks he's untouchable because he's careful about hiding his activities from me. But he's not hiding them from you, is he? I thought about the recordings on my phone, the text messages I'd screenshot, the evidence I'd been gathering. No, he's not. Then I propose we help each other. You give me everything you have on their relationship, and I'll make sure you get copies of everything my investigator finds. When this is over, they'll both understand that actions have consequences. We shook hands, and I felt like I'd just enlisted in a war I was finally equipped to win. That night, I lay in bed next to Andrea, listening to her breathe and thinking about the photos in Susan's folder. My wife was living a double life with the same casual ease she brought to everything else, compartmentalizing her deception like it was just another case to manage. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the man she was betraying. I wasn't the pathetic loser she thought I was. I was someone who'd built a career on exposing lies and bringing down people who thought they were smarter than the system. And I was very, very good at my job. The Beacon Hill Charity Luncheon was exactly the kind of event Andrea lived for. A chance to network with Boston's elite while pretending to care about underprivileged children. She'd been planning her outfit for weeks, discussing the guest list like it was a military operation, and practicing her small talk in the mirror. She had no idea she was walking into a carefully orchestrated ambush. Susan Devlin had been instrumental in setting up the trap. As one of the event's major sponsors, she had access to the seating chart, the guest list, and most importantly, the table assignments. Andrea would be sitting at table 12, surrounded by some of Boston's biggest gossips, with Jessica right beside her for moral support. What Andrea didn't know was that Jessica had received a very interesting phone call the night before. Jessica. I'd used a voice modulator app to disguise my voice, making myself sound like an older woman. This is Margaret from the Herald Society page. I understand you're close friends with Andrea Heller? Yes, we've been friends for years. Why? We're working on a story about successful women balancing career and family, and Andrea's name came up. Would you be willing to share some insights about her personal life? Off the record, of course. Jessica, who'd never met a piece of gossip she couldn't improve with embellishment, had been more than happy to talk. I'd recorded every word, including her detailed description of Operation Upgrade, and her opinion that Andrea deserved someone more exciting than that boring insurance guy. Now, sitting at a table across the room with Susan, I watched Jessica work her way through her third mimosa, while Andrea tried to make conversation with the wife of a federal judge. The charity luncheon was in full swing, with speeches about helping disadvantaged youth and silent auction items that cost more than most people made in a month. She looks nervous, Susan observed, watching Andrea fidget with her napkin. She should be. She's about to learn what happens when you underestimate people. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to the number I'd used to contact Jessica. This is Margaret from the Herald. I'm at the luncheon today. Could you point out Andrea for me? And maybe share some of those stories you mentioned? Jessica's face lit up when she read the message. She looked around the room, trying to spot someone who might be a society reporter, then leaned over to whisper something to Andrea. I couldn't hear what she said, but Andrea's expression suggested it wasn't good news. Ladies and gentlemen, the event coordinator announced from the podium. We'd like to thank all our sponsors and volunteers who made today possible. Special recognition goes to Susan Devlin, whose generous contribution has helped us exceed our fundraising goals. Susan stood and waved graciously, the picture of charitable elegance. She'd insisted on this moment of recognition, and now I understood why. Every eye in the room was on her, including Andrea's. My wife was staring at Mark's wife, with the kind of fascination usually reserved for car accidents. She doesn't know, Susan murmured, sitting back down. Know what? That I know about them. Mark thinks he's been so clever, keeping his wife and his mistresses in separate worlds. He has no idea that his wife and his mistress's husband are sitting at the same table, planning his destruction. The irony was delicious. Jessica, emboldened by alcohol and the prospect of being quoted in the newspaper, was now holding court at table 12. I could see her gesturing animatedly, clearly telling stories that were making the other women lean in with interest. Andrea was trying to change the subject, but Jessica was on a roll. My phone buzzed with a text from the number I'd given Jessica. Could you be more specific about Andrea's new relationship? Our readers love romance stories. Jessica's response was immediate and devastating. Oh, it's so exciting. She's been seeing this gorgeous real estate agent, Mark something. They're planning to leave their spouses and start fresh. It's like something out of a movie. The women at table 12 were now staring at Andrea with the kind of intense interest that made social reputations crumble. I could see Andrea's face turning red as she tried to deny Jessica's claims. But Jessica was drunk enough to double down. Don't be modest, Jessica laughed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You've been glowing for months. And the way you talk about him, it's obvious you're head over heels. The conversation at surrounding tables had died as people strained to listen. Andrea looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. But there was nowhere to hide in a room full of Boston's biggest gossips. I think that's enough, Andrea said quietly. But Jessica was beyond caring about discretion. Oh, come on. You said yourself that Tom never appreciated you, that you deserved someone who understood your ambition. And Mark sounds perfect, successful, charming, everything you wanted. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the room was now openly staring at table 12, where Andrea sat frozen like a deer in headlights. The wife of the federal judge looked scandalized. The society matrons were already reaching for their phones, no doubt preparing to spread the news through Boston's social networks. Susan leaned over and whispered, I almost feel sorry for her. Don't. She made her choice. Andrea stood abruptly, mumbling something about feeling sick, and practically ran for the exit. Jessica, finally realizing what she'd done, tried to follow, but the damage was complete. Within minutes, the story would be all over Boston's social media, shared and embellished until it took on a life of its own. My phone rang as I watched Andrea flee the scene. It was Mark. What the hell happened at that charity thing? He demanded. Andrea just called me crying, saying something about Jessica and the newspaper. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said innocently. Andrea went to some charity luncheon. I assumed she was with you. She was supposed to be networking, not shit. This is bad, Tom. Really bad. What's bad? I'm confused. There was a long pause. Nothing. Never mind. I misspoke. He hung up, and I smiled. The first crack in their perfect facade had appeared, and it was only going to get wider from here. That evening, Andrea came home looking like she'd been through a war. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, her makeup was smudged, and her hands were shaking as she poured herself a glass of wine. Rough day? I asked, not looking up from my newspaper. Jessica got drunk and said some stupid things. People took them the wrong way. What kind of stupid things? Andrea hesitated, clearly trying to figure out how much to tell me. She implied that I was having an affair. I looked up with what I hoped was the right expression of shock and concern. What? That's ridiculous. Why would she say something like that? I don't know. She's been acting strange lately, asking weird questions about my schedule, my work. I think she might be jealous of my success. The ease with which she lied to my face was almost impressive. Even caught red-handed, she was trying to manipulate the situation, to make herself the victim. Well, anyone who knows you would realize it's nonsense, I said. You're not the type to have an affair. She looked at me sharply, as if trying to detect sarcasm. But I kept my expression neutral. Exactly. But you know how people talk. This could be really damaging to my reputation, my career. I'm sure it'll blow over. These society people probably have short attention spans. But we both knew that wasn't true. In a city like Boston, where everyone knew everyone else's business, a scandal like this had staying power. Andrea's carefully cultivated image as the perfect professional woman was cracking, and we both knew it. Later that night, I heard her on the phone in her office, her voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Damage control. She was trying to salvage a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of her control. What she didn't realize was that the charity luncheon was just the opening move. I had bigger plans, and they were all designed to show her what happened when you betrayed someone who knew how to fight back. The war was just beginning. The first sign that my plan was working came 3 days later, when Andrea's phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. She answered with the groggy confusion of someone who'd been drinking wine until midnight, trying to forget her problems. What do you mean, suspended? Her voice went from sleepy to sharp in seconds. On what grounds? I pretended to be asleep while she paced the bedroom, her voice rising with each word. The conversation lasted 20 minutes,